When I came over for my first of 2 interviews for this job, when I was headhunted to come to England, I had to present to a bunch of exercise physiologists. Now these are the guys that wire you up to machines while you're running and record all your breath and work out how much energy you expended and how fit you are, right? And they were in the back row there, and they were just literally barely containing themselves in their seats because they were hysterical with laughter, all right? I knew I'd said something. What I was talking about was the whole drug contamination issue to do with supplements and how supplements have been contaminated, and how if an athlete takes these particular supplements, they can actually be banned for life, all right, or 2 years or 4 years or whatever the case may be. And about how we get the products and we take them into the lab and we analyse them and we make sure that their batch is actually safe, all right? So I was talking about batch testing. They thought I said bitch testing. So just be careful, all right? So again, if I say something you're not sure, please just ask. Okay. We are what we eat. And for an athlete, this is so true. And I think we need to remember that the Olympic Games is the highest achievement for an athlete. And they will have taken 4, 8, in some cases 12 years to get to their goal. And if you look at people like Sir Steve Redgrave, who's got 5 gold medals, some of these athletes have a really long longevity now in their sport. Okay, so the key thing here now is for these athletes who are eating to actually get the maximum benefit from the nutrition. And we take it quite strongly as a science. Okay. So the other thing is that everyone's an expert because they eat. All right, so you're all experts, but you have a different perspective to it than perhaps what I do. And eating is a memory, it's emotion, it's familiarity, and it's also a philosophy. Do you sit down to a meal and think, I need to eat this huge bowl of pasta because I'm going to do 2 hours in a marathon tomorrow? I'm sure you don't think like that. No, I think you think about all the flavours and the texture and the combinations and all those things and how it was put together and where it's all from. My athletes don't think like that at all. Food is fuel. That's how they look at it. They want to know how much energy they can get out of it, how many nutrients they can get out, how long it's going to last, when they need to top up, how fast they need to top up, how much food they need to have, and then probably when they're going to eat again. And you know what? Some of them don't even care what it looks like, tastes like, so they'll just put it in a blender, slug it down. In fact, in some cases, the worse it tastes, the better they think it's going to be for them. They're not interested, all right? Maybe that's why I never got to the Olympics. I'm too interested in my food. Okay, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a history about food and sport and activity so you get a bit of a feel for where it's come from. In the dawn of time, if you didn't go out and grab your food, you died. It was really simple. Catch it or die. It's simple. Then I'm sure you've heard of Milo, the Greek wrestler who got numerous medals and went to 5 Olympic Games. He was quite a phenomenal athlete. Now I don't know if any of you have heard of creatine, but creatine is a supplement that athletes use to help with their muscle and regeneration of energy. It's a very popular supplement. These days it's manufactured, but it's really high in meat. Alright, so if you eat a growing calf, and you eat huge volumes, I'm talking kilos of meat, you will be a creatine loader. See, he was our actual very first ergogenic aid in sport by eating large amounts of meat to get the creatine, all right? So nothing I do is new. I just was, you know, when you look at it this way, you're totally devastated. And then you've got people identifying unique characteristics of pork. This is when thiamine came out, although these Greek philosophers didn't know what it was. They just knew that there was something in pork that helped with energy, that made you feel better. And there's a whole list of things you can go through. We discovered glycogen, which is like petrol in your car, which is your fuel tank in your muscles. 1857. It's not new. It wasn't discovered, you know, this century or the last century. It's been around for such a long time. And during the 2 wars, there were huge amounts of advances in nutrition. A lot of the vitamins were discovered, a lot of the pathways discovered, a lot of the testing that we use this day on athletes was discovered then because it helped the pilots and helped the army and the soldiers and everybody to actually stay out longer. Having worked with the Defence Forces, there are things we're allowed to do in the Defence Forces and things we can give the soldiers that we can't give the athletes because it's a competitive advantage. But when you have to stay awake for 48 hours and your life's at stake, well, we're probably going to throw anything at you that we possibly can. And it's usually under controlled environment because they were trying to protect people's lives, but when we're working with athletes we want fair and equal, and we want it to be the athletes' natural ability and training and coaching that's actually got them to where they are. And I just thought some of you will understand the whole philosophy and how nutrition has changed in sport, because in the 60s, that's the Gatorade era. That's when Gatorade came out with the Florida Gators. That's when sports drinks first started. And I can remember being back in New Zealand, actually hearing about some of this sort of stuff. I mean, it wasn't quite the 60s, but and mixing up these drinks, trying to make these drinks, because we heard they made people better. We heard that hydration was important. And then the 70s is the whole carbohydrate. They did all the experiments on loading your muscles with carbs. This is the big pasta era, where you loaded down pasta and bread and rice, and actually a lot of them went slower because they overate. They garbo-loaded, all right? They really were garbo-loading rather than carbo-loading. Any carbs, and they ate massive amounts. And then you remember the 80s, which was all the fibre, and Nathan Pritikin and all those guys, and also the anti-fat, saturated fat first started to be bad around this time. So we were putting athletes on very low fat, high fibre diets, and they were moving, but it wasn't on the tennis court, or they were moving elsewhere. Then of course in the 1990s was creatine, and protein starts to become important when we start talking about athletes needing more protein than what the general population does, because they're putting their body through more stresses. We've got more science, we've got more medicine, we're starting to get some technology where we can start to look inside people's muscles. They're doing muscle biopsies. Really, don't volunteer unless they pay you lots of money, all right? They cut a little hole in your thigh, put some tweezers in, pull out a piece of muscle, and they say, now go run, then come back and we'll have another look. So they take 2 little bits and then they compare you to see how much glycogen you've lost in your muscle. You get used to it, If you're good, you don't need anaesthetic. Okay, and then more recently, in the 2000s, we're starting to look at antioxidants. And I like this area because this is when it comes back to food. We're starting to talk about red colours and green colours and all those important things that are found, and having a rainbow on your plate. And then we started to have recovery drinks, and people are drowning chocolate milk and strawberry milk and smoothies and things. It's a really, from a food point of view, it's really positive. And now we've moved into some of these things called nitrates. And who here knows that beetroot juice is really good if you want to do lots of exercise? Okay, so you've heard some of that research about the nitrates that have been found in beetroot and spinach and rhubarb, and a lot of your vegetables contain these nitrates, which actually also lower your blood pressure. And this is a classic case where we've taken research from the clinical setting, because we've known that vegetables actually lower blood pressure, but they just didn't know what it was. And now they've identified the nitrates, so we've now actually moved it into the athletic performance environment. Okay? There is a limit, and it has a very acute response, so you only take it within an hour before. If you take too much, you will have very purple urine. And I warn you, you're not bleeding from your bladder. It's quite psychedelic, all right? And some people actually don't have the enzyme that breaks down the colour, so it comes out really bright. Okay, but it's not harmful. And then we have beta-alanine, which is a buffer. Now, a lot of you who do baking know about the effects of baking soda working with acid to produce carbon dioxide to raise. Okay, we use these buffers in the muscles to buffer the acid that's being produced in the muscles, so the athletes can go longer without getting those burn and actually fatiguing. Alright? Now we can't use the baking soda that you use at home because it's got starch into it, and that makes the athlete's stomach a bit upset. Alright, so we have to have specially refined sodium bicarbonate that we actually use. Okay, and now more recently we're moving into more of these kind of components. You can find beta-alanine in turkey, you can find it in shrimps, you can find it in meat. So the people we know now are at risk are probably our vegetarian athletes, who actually need to be looking at creatine and beta-alanine more, because they're probably at a competitive disadvantage with a meat-eating athlete. And there's some indication that as our diet is changing, that some of these compounds naturally in our diet are actually dropping. Alright, so we're kind of reminding the athletes that they need to get back and to get variety and have meat on a regular basis and have a good variety of different types of meats. There's also concerns that some of these antioxidants, things like the polyphenols and the isoflavonoids, if you take too many of these, they can actually undo some of these protective pathways that the athletes have been using. Alright, or trying to adapt with all the training and trying to push to the maximum. But we've also got interesting research coming about tomato juice being helpful for athletes because of the lycopene that's present, and I'm sure you've heard of lycopene, and using the blackcurrant powders that are available now because they contain anthocyanins, which is having an effect on the muscles and helping the regeneration of tissue and helping athletes generally to recover a little bit faster, particularly when they're doing really, really hard training sessions. Because remember, the athletes that I'm working with, and the ones I'm talking about, are training 8 hours a day. They will get up in the morning, they'll go and do a gym session for 2 hours, they'll do their sport-specific training for 2 hours, they'll have a strength and conditioning session where they'll lift weights or do shuttles or some form of weight training, they'll go to a massage for an hour, they'll go to a physiotherapy session for an hour, they might have a session with me for a couple of hours, then they'll go home and that's their day, it's a job, alright? And quite often they don't get a day off. Alright, and then what they have to do is they have to peak things really well so that an event like the Olympic Games, they're perfectly prepared and ready. Okay. And the other thing that we're really interested in at the moment is what we call nutrigenomics, is looking at what we can do with nutrition to influence gene pathways. Alright, we're using it a lot in medicine, identifying people who've got heart disease and at risk of diabetes and saying maybe if you eat this way you could delay that. Or we're really interested in looking at it from a nutrition point of view. Can we give people particular nutrients and help them to grow lean mass? So can they be more muscly? Can they be the right shape and size? Can we help little gymnasts be better and be more dense with their bones, and people who have weak bones, can we help them through what genetics to actually be stronger and fitter and faster? Okay? Okay. This is just a quote. Of all the sciences, nutrition may have more to offer an athlete than any other, because it's the one they don't pay the most attention to. All right? Because we all eat, and it's kind of something that we do every day. They don't often think about it the same. All right? But because what we know is if they have a poor diet, that can undo all the good work. All right? And we know if they get it wrong, it can be an absolute disaster. And in my time, I've seen a few things where athletes have gone off, got talking to somebody or seen something, done something new, eaten something new. I'm banning all my athletes from zones 2, 4 and 6. That looks like way too much fun for me, alright? So then they're going nowhere where the spectators go until the event is over, alright? We don't have a problem with McDonald's either, because you need to remember after the first day of the Olympics there could be 300 athletes whose dream is over. It's finished. Alright, so do we want them in the Olympic Village with all the athletes that have still got to stay focused? Probably not. We want them to go off somewhere and enjoy and be away and not be a distraction. Alright, and think of the poor marathon runners who are the last event of every Olympic Games. So while everybody else is kind of finishing and got their medals, they're still sitting there in the village thinking, well, I've still got to watch my weight, I've still got to eat properly, can't go for huge runs because I don't want to do any injuries and I don't want to deplete my glycogen stores. And you know, I really have empathy for the marathon runners at the end because they are the last ones, the absolute last ones to go through. Okay. And the other thing is, and you'll know this about food and nutrition, as we get more science, the story changes. Alright? So what we say one day was no good, the next article comes out and says it's actually working well, and so it all comes back to variety and moderation. Alright? And so we need to be able to adjust our messages and to be concurrent. I'm just going to skip through those because just what I was going to do is just talk to you a little bit about some of the roles I've had, but I think what I'm going to do now is just move straight on and just talk to what's coming, what we're doing for Team GB. I was fortunate enough to be part of the International Olympic Committee Medical Committee on Sports Nutrition. If you like science and you like nutrition, this is actually a good read because it chronologically kind of goes back and looks at how things have changed and how we are expanding the guidelines that we give people to cover more options. Now, you may have heard things like for a marathon you need to have 10 grams of carbohydrate per kg of body weight. I'm sure any of you, I mean, you're probably running marathons on a regular basis. So, oh, you're not? Oh, okay, fine. But we have all these guidelines, and the nice thing about science is that as we move on, we get more clarity. But you know, we're all different shapes and sizes in this room, as are some of the athletes. So they need different and specific recommendations. So a lot of the work that we're doing is taking an individual person, taking their event, getting the guidelines, and then individualising to exactly what that athlete needs. And then helping them to do that the best way that they can wherever they're going to be for their event. And then keeping them on track with the different types of training and things that they will actually have to do. Okay, so the group I work for is called the English Institute of Sport. Now there is a Scottish Institute of Sport, a Welsh Institute of Sport, and a Northern Ireland Institute of Sport. The biggest learning curve for me is there is no UK Institute of Sport. So we all come together for the Olympics, And then once that's over, we're not talking to each other until the comm games are over. All right? Okay, so we're like, you're my best buddy for now, but I'm sorry you then become my enemy. No, it's not quite like that. With nutrition, we're actually very helpful and very good. But it is kind of a weird, it's the only area in the world I know this happens. Nowhere else in the world does this unique set of circumstances happen where everyone comes together and you're one team and then suddenly you split off. You don't do it in football, you don't do it in rugby, you don't do it in netball either. So it's just kind of the way it is. But basically I have a staff of 15 nutritionists who help me deliver the service to the different sports for the Olympics and for the Paralympics. And we support about 1,700 athletes, and we will support most of the athletes that are actually going through to London to be at the village. And what's really nice about this is we actually have specialists. So I have a nutritionist who specialises in triathlon, in swimming, in disability swimming, in wheelchair. We have people in athletics. So each of the sports often has somebody who's very well trained in the area of nutrition requirements for that particular sport. So very high tech, it's really good. And we have more than the Australians, which is even better. Okay. I love England and the UK and anyone that beats Australia. Sorry, I didn't say that. My Australian friends still love me. Okay, so our whole philosophy is for the athletes to be nutritionally optimised, to train to compete to win. That's our focus. All right, so when we're working with people, that's kind of what we're looking at. Okay, so we have a range of qualifications. Well, I just thought I'd just quickly share with you because we are a mixture. So I have a lot of chef training. I'm also a dietitian. I'm also a nutritionist. I'm also a trained teacher. Yeah, I know, too many qualifications, but you know, that's what happens. So we also have nutritionists that come in from a sports science background. So these will have a physiology or a strength and conditioning background. We've even got some people who've got medical backgrounds who've come through that pathway. We've got others that are coming through the dietetic background, so they've done clinical work. And then we've got people that have come from other countries, so we're trying to find things where they all link up together. We all have the International Olympic Committee Diploma in Sports Nutrition. And in the UK now, we're really trying to promote nutritionists who actually, in sport particularly, who belong to the Sports and Exercise Nutrition Register. Because there is no standard registration so that you've got equality of standards. All right? And you've got your chefs associations and you've got the guild, so they kind of help to look after your professional membership. We're still a long way because we're actually relatively a very young profession. All right? Okay, so what do? Well, we look at 3 general areas. So when I'm working with an athlete, I want you to pretend, think of a sport that you like, or one you're going to watch in the Olympics in your head as I go through this with you. So first thing we're going to talk to you about is going to talk to you about food science and what you generally do, what you eat for breakfast, what you eat for lunch, what you eat for dinner. All right? Then we're going to talk about any medical issues you have. Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have high cholesterol? Do you have weak bones? Do you need to gain muscle mass? Are you the right body weight? Are you the right body shape? So that's where we'll talk about clinical things. And then we look at performance. What do you need to be for your particular sport? So for a marathon runner, who is quite different from a 100 metres runner, who is quite different from my little gymnasts that we work with, who is quite different from a hockey team, what are the unique things that we actually need to do for you? So do we need to bulk you up? Do we need to slim you down? Canoeists, I don't know if you've ever seen a canoeist, put them in a canoe and they look really powerful from the waist up, but they've got whizzy legs, all right? You don't use your legs in canoeing. They're like anatomically the weirdest people you've seen. They know, I'm not saying anything I wouldn't say to them, but it's because they don't use their feet. But you look at a rower, and because a rower pulls with their legs, completely different shape, all right? One of the best stories I ever had to do with nutrition is to do with a bunch of rowers. And I was invited to have lunch with them after a training session. And I walked in, and this is the rowing aid, and they got an ice cream container of mashed potato, they got a plate with their meat and a few vegetables, and then they got some bread. All right? And they must have had about 3,000 calories. And honestly, it was all gone in like 20 minutes, completely disappeared. All right? And then some of them went up for seconds, because they're just such strong engines. All right? Because they actually need that fuel to actually power them. But the thing for them is being able to get enough variety while they're trying to get those calories in. It's actually quite a hard job. We may think it's wonderful that we can eat what we like and, you know, they can eat heaps and heaps, but it actually is quite hard work. Okay, So the 6 areas that we work with and that a sports nutritionist must have, or we call ourselves performance nutritionists because we are about performance. And at times some of the things that we may do may not be healthy. For example, if we have to get an athlete down to make a weight in boxing, taekwondo, weightlifting, to make that weight, because remember, if they don't hit that weight 50 grams over and you're out, you cannot compete. Alright, so can you imagine training for 4 years and getting on a set of scales, and this actually happened in India where the scales were actually a kilo out, alright, and all that, you know, these are some of the stories, can you imagine, and they were a kilo heavy. Alright, so can you imagine what it did to all those athletes, just the stress and the frustration and the anguish it would create. Fortunately, some of the staff from the British team there were quite aware and they had their own set of scales and they could tell that this is what the problem was and they got them recalibrated and all. But that was after some athletes had put on rubbish bags and gone out and dehydrated and sauna to get the extra kilo off. Alright.
So then we had to put it all back on again.
No, well they probably wouldn't because it wouldn't be time because they have to compete. Alright, so that's where it becomes really technical and you've got to make sure that your equipment's good but also that you trust the information that you have and you know what you're doing. Alright, can be absolutely critical. So that's where the science has a big role. We also have to have a lot of convincing people that and getting them to change their habits. You know, we all know how bad the obesity problem is, but the nice thing about working with an athlete is if I say this will make you go faster, this will make you run a second faster, most of the athletes are right onto it. They will actually make those changes and stick to them. Alright? And some of those can be about helping them to recover faster, maybe being a bit lighter. They do this with equipment, shifting positions on bikes, making small changes to boats and things. Sailing's a classic. If you're lighter in the water and light winds, you'll go faster. If you're too heavy, you're too slow. Right? It's a whole bunch of things that we work with. And then the clinical knowledge is if you've got any gastro upsets. How many people here got nervous before a major event or an exam? You get butterflies and you can't eat. It's no good to my athletes if they have to compete. We've got to get them over that. So we have special formulas that we use and special meals that we use that actually make them feel light, make them feel comfortable, so they can actually get some food and fluid into them so they can actually still go and compete. One of the things I often say to the athletes, can you imagine walking into the biggest supermarket in the world, which is basically what the Olympic dining room will be, and it's all for free. You can have whatever you like, whenever you like, 24 hours a day, and it's all for free. They've got to be focused, really focused when they actually go in there so they can tune out the fridges of Magnums and all the treats and all those yummy things that are out there and the fries and all that sort of stuff so they can be continually focused on what they need. So we need good food science background, and that's kind of nice because you can explain what's going on. We also need to be practical. We are the can-do people. So when I say you need more carbohydrate, I will say you can have that as bananas, rice, pasta, breakfast cereal, fruit juice. Alright, because the new catchphrase in carbohydrate is a mixture of glucose and fructose. Alright, because that seems to be absorbed much faster from your gut for performance. Alright, rather than just straight glucose on its own. You can oxidize more for fuel. That's literally just burning it like petrol. Alright, so you can be more efficient and get more out of it. And then of course we always need good catering skills. Right? Because we work with lots of chefs, and I'm working very closely with the holding camp, which is going to be in Loughborough, which I'm going to talk to you about very shortly, about all the things we're kind of putting it together. And we have to roll all that together to make all the athletes the perfect picture of nutrition, I wish. Okay. And this is just some of the things that I might deal with. As again, we have this thing called undesirable weight gain and undesirable weight loss. Now, some athletes, when they get nervous, stop eating because they lose their appetite, and it's just the effect of the stress hormones or just the lack of experience in an Olympic venue. And they'll lose muscle. If you stop eating, you waste muscle. Alright? That's not very good because that's your power, your strength, your endurance gone. If you don't cope with your eating and your portions, because you can choose as much food as you like from that big supermarket, you're going to put on undesirable weight, which will make you heavy and slower. Alright, and if you're a gymnast or you're an archer, it can affect the way your uniform fits, so it affects the way you shoot. Alright, so all those things are going to be really key. And we don't want people changing too much from where their probably ideal is once they go into the village. Alright, most athletes go into the village with an injury. Alright, they just train so hard all the time. Alright, and I think people often forget about that. It's just because they've pushed their bodies to the max for all these years. One of the issues that we did have in Beijing was the different type of bacteria that was there, different environments. So we were very hot on hand hygiene and personal hygiene and all those sorts of things to make sure people looked after themselves. These are the most dangerous things in an Olympic village, all right? Because your bacteria is fine for you, but it's no good to somebody else, all right? So the hand gelling and that sort of stuff is very strict on that sort of thing. To protect the athletes, because their immune systems are going to be compromised because they're quite vulnerable with all the amount of training, and some of them have got low body weights, you know, to compete at. So they are quite vulnerable. And yes, there's even been a few pregnancies that we've had to deal with along the way, but you know, you just deal with it and get on with it. Okay. Okay, this is just some of the things that we're finishing off at the moment. Most of our work will be done. The big stuff is all done. We're now just fine-tuning, and I put cricket pictures up there because I can't put athlete pictures up because of the confidentiality of the data. We can't tell you. If anybody says, are you doing anything? I go, no, sorry, no, it's all very boring, all right, because it's all secret squirrel, and we don't want anyone to know until after the games. So if you ask me to give this presentation after the games, it'll be quite different.
You can't say what athletes you're working for?
Well, no, we can't tell you some of the special things we're doing in nutrition for some of the athletes, because we don't want to release. I was just in a conference in San Francisco recently, a big sports nutrition conference, sports medicine conference, and they said, oh my gosh, you're here. And I go, yeah, we're organised, we're fine. Going, oh, I hope they can't see, I'm not telling quite, you know, but we're pretty well organised, and we're pretty up for anything at the moment. But competitive advantage and home advantage says we're not telling anybody what we're doing. All right, and you'll hear a lot more things about some of the innovations and the creative things after the games. Hopefully after we've got the medals.
That's right.
Okay, so there'll be a lot of hydration monitoring going on, helping people to adjust to the temp. And hasn't the weather been weird? It's really not helped us, I have to say. We measure people's sweat. We put little machines on you, and we can work out how much sodium's in your sweat, and then we monitor how much water you lose when you go for a run or do a training session. Then we can tell you exactly how much to use, and we might even make you a special sports drink. All right, that's just for you because that suits your particular unique needs. And we'll be really fine-tuning people's body composition. We measure you, all right? So we take some of about 24 different measurements over the body on a regular basis, so we pretty much know what muscles are growing, what muscles are shrinking, you know, how your body fat's looking, that sort of thing. It's an everyday job for us. Okay, and this is our biggest risk, all right? This is the biggest thing that we're worried about, that there'll be a contamination, which is why we work so closely with people like Jan, because of the food security, all right? We don't want any supplement contamination. We don't want any athlete to take anything that's going to cause them to have a banned test. So they will be encouraged to eat the food in the village or eat from a well-known place, would you believe, like McDonald's or somewhere like that, where we know we can trust the quality of the food and nothing untoward is actually going to get into it. Okay.
She mentioned something about poppy seeds.
Yes.
Presumably they're not opium poppy seeds.
No, presumably they're not opium poppy seeds, but there have been a couple of studies done where if you eat a reasonable amount of poppy seeds, you can produce enough of a contaminant in the urine sample to give you a positive test.
Right.
Yeah, and then you're out.
Yeah.
No questions asked. So that's why no poppy seeds. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm sure you don't do this, right? Your response will be, I want something that can make me perform better in PE rather than not get out of PE. All right? Okay. But these are some of the things I've had to deal with in the last 18 months. Methylhexamine is a stimulant that's banned, that's been found in a lot of what we call thermogenic supplements, which is things that will help to promote weight loss. And there have been a number of rugby teams this side and the southern hemisphere that have actually come foul of this, and people have been banned. So we had to put some warnings out about that. You remember that food safety E. coli scare that stopped athletes eating lots of vegetables and fruits and problems with travelling? Big issue for us with athletes going into Europe. All right, and so we actually had to, and I don't know if you're aware, but there were massive dumpings of cucumber and sprouts in the US as well. And it had nothing to do with the E. coli breakout. I'm not sure if you're aware of the clenbuterol contamination, which is a steroid contamination in meat that's been around. It is a food poisoning issue because it's due to poor veterinary practices. All right, but if an athlete eats meat contaminated with clenbuterol in 24 hours, if they have a urine sample, they'll get a positive test. All right, so some parts of the world it was particularly difficult.
So how can you control, I mean, you said Do you know that's not?
No, you can't actually. No, it's really difficult, that one. So what we did was the first thing was, because of the creatine issue, we said to athletes, no, you don't need to be a vegetarian. What you do need to do is be aware in certain countries not to eat large amounts of meat, and you need to vary your meat, and you need to eat meat from very safe places. Okay, and so what we suggested to people was have fish, chicken, pork and turkey, and mix up your meats. Don't have large amounts of meat or large amounts of chicken in particular countries. And then we had a lot of athletes going off to Japan after the nuclear issue there, and so we had to help put some issues and calm people down with some of the food irradiation issues, and not to eat too many mushrooms, and just to watch food that was grown at markets and out of the ground. And the government over there had quite a nice quarantine kind of sort of process, so it wasn't such a big issue, but it was still a concern for some people, and some sports actually cancelled their trips. So that was what we had to. And then we had this other contaminant. Bitter orange contains a compound that's actually in your orange juice and your marmalade. Alright, and it's also an orange flavour in a lot of sports supplements because it's quite a strong orange flavour. But if you eat enough of it, you can get a positive contamination test. Alright, but you have to drink huge amounts of juice. But for some of my athletes, 3 litres of orange juice is nothing. Alright, okay, so, and then you put marmalade on your toast, and then you take an orange smoothie and some of these other things. So our manufacturers were very good and just said, let's delete it. So, and that was fine. So that has not been an issue for us. You'd have to have an awful lot and have to be quite deliberate to do it, but we didn't want to take the risk. And my biggest concern now is that something's going to pop up between now and the games as a supplement that's a contaminant that we don't know about. So we've got a watching brief. So let me just quickly talk to you about what's going on at Loughborough. My job is to support the catering and to actually set the menus for Team GB when they go into the holding camp. Now this is what they call the pre-preparation camp. So this is the last few weeks, days before they actually come down to London. So this is the fine-tuning. This is getting the first-time Olympians into an environment that they've probably never been into before, where they just, you know, can you imagine sitting at the dining room table with Usain Bolt and then Federer on the other side, and, you know, some of the famous basketballers, you know, just across the way there. It can be quite overwhelming for young athletes. Okay. And we have this thing called the home advantage. Okay, and you would have heard a lot about home advantage. So what does it mean to us in terms of nutrition? Well, one, it's close to home, and hopefully we want it to have that home feel. Athletes don't have to travel so much. There'll be lots of familiar dishes, and one of the things Jan didn't say was that there was a British section on the menu. All right, and it has all nice sounding British names, and they're all regionalised from all the different parts, including Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland, and it's quite nice actually. I've learned a lot actually about what belongs in each region from actually going through the menus. There's a few things in there I'm not so sure about, but we'll see. But you've got to remember that, you know, halfway through the games, half the athletes will be finished, so they can probably go back and have those then. It's a familiar environment. You know, you're in streets, you know, you're in areas, you know, you're around shops, you know, you're around people, you know. This is one of the biggest British teams ever. You don't have to acclimatise. We're not going to altitude. And while I've got a question mark there by weather, who knows what the weather's going to be doing? You know, what's kind of nice about that is everybody's in the same boat as us. It could be 28 degrees or it could be 12. All right, so we're kind of planning for both options there. No jet lag because there's no time zone changes, you know, and that's fantastic. Our bacteria is local. It sounds kind of a weird thing to say, but it's bacteria that we're familiar with. You know, and we're familiar with lots of things around to do with bacteria and you know, all the ducks and birds and things. That's all well known for all our British athletes. And we know the water supply is safe and we don't have to worry about it. We're familiar with the style of service, all right, and the practices, table service, self-service, looking after yourself, queuing up, dare I say it, we're very good at queuing up. We know what queues are like, we're quite patient with those. No really unusual foods on the menu unless you go looking for them. All right. Yes, there are some strange, there's rice and peas, I think on one of the Caribbean menus, and there's some unusual types of porridge that are going to be for some of the African countries. You can go and try them if you want, but if you're focused on your event, you'll stay and you'll eat with what's familiar with you. We know that it's all local British food, and that gives my athletes a sense of safety and security. You know, it's from home. It's what mum would hopefully put on the table for them at home. They can bring their supplements with them, and they can bring any special sport foods they need with them. Where if we go overseas, we're often stuck by quarantine or we're stuck by import laws that we can't bring half the stuff in. We lost container loads of stuff going into China. All right, it's not going to happen here. And because we're such a nice country, we're not going to do that to everybody else either. But you know, that's the way we are. All right. But the nice thing is they can follow the normal practices that they would do, have their normal routines, have their porridge or have whatever they have, all their normal foods. The only possible disadvantages is the pressure on the media because they're at home and everybody wants a piece of them, and also having huge high expectation and huge expectations for the results for the games. Okay. So one of the things that we have is we have different sports doing some slightly different things that's going to work for their sports. And we have some camps, some of the sports coming to Loughborough, and we have got a couple of the bigger guys going off and doing their own holding camps. For example, UK Athletics are just jumping across the ditch a little bit and just getting away because they've got some very high profile people, and they've worked out that's what's going to work for them the best. Why have a holding camp? It gives you an opportunity to be in a large scale environment with lots of athletes. We've got a lot of first time Olympians. Gives them the opportunity to eat in a big dining venue. A lot of these guys have only been in small sports, gone away in numbers of 30. They're suddenly going to be put into numbers of 200. And then when they go into the Olympic Village, you're going to be into almost 12,000 people. All right, so when you escalate that up, it's quite overwhelming. They get to see other athletes, how they prepare. They get to stay focused because there's people like me, when you ask me a silly question, I'll go, but this is the holding camp for the preparation for the London Olympics. Why do you want ice cream every day? You know, you've got to really justify it to me, and you'd have to be an athlete that's weight was falling off them before I would say, would you do that at home? If the answer is no, sorry, you're not having it here. All right. So there will be a cooked breakfast for the athletes at the holding camp, but it's not bacon every day because most athletes don't have bacon every day at home. All right. They might have it once or twice a week. They might have eggs once or twice a week. They might have a kidgery once a week or once every 2 or 3 weeks or never. So we're just trying to say, what would you normally do at home? This is what we want you to do. And we also want to make it fun and interesting, but we also want to have a little bit of a quiet, protected environment, and for them to be around like-minded things, because there's a kind of swelling that goes on when you're with a bunch of athletes like this, that you all get focused and you get more focused and you get more tunnel vision on what your goal is, and more encouragement too. Basically, we have to cater from 800 calories to more than 4,500 on the same buffet system. All right, that's my job. That's what I have to do. All right, so my weight class athletes and my young athletes and my small athletes can get enough of the right things, as well as my athletes who need to eat a lot, like those rowers and some of the other athletes that have quite high energy demands. Some of the big weightlifters and judo people. We just define tweaking, that they've got a range of food. We keep it quite plain. We're also I always take desserts and put them away somewhere else so it's not tempting. So if you need it, you go and get it. If you don't, you're not tempted, just to make life easier. We've incorporated into the menu high antioxidant intake, high polyphenol intake, which is all your reds and colours, high omega-3, high vitamin C, and a number of other things to make sure that the athletes are getting all the things that they need before they come down to London. All right? Because they'll be more focused on performing and then doing the right thing when they come down here, because they'll come down getting ready for their events. We need to protect their immunity from a nutritional perspective, from a hydration perspective, as well as from a bacteria perspective, because they're the three things that could go wrong for us. Make sure they get enough to recover. How many here drink strawberry milk, chocolate milk, flavoured milk? Because if you do, you could be an athlete. Right? Because that is the most popular recovery food, because the milk naturally contains obviously water, a bit of calcium, a bit of protein and a bit of sodium and some carbohydrates, so it makes an ideal recovery drink for an athlete after a session. Alright? And then they'll just drink extra water and things. So we know we're going to have quite a high demand for some of these products at the holding camp. And we don't want them to have flavour fatigue. So we've mimicked some of the things that are going on in London. And Jan's already talked about a lot of these. So it's an 8-day menu. We're trying to avoid repetition. We'll have vegan and vegetarian meals. We'll have the availability of halal meat because we have got some athletes that require that. We will have a lot of allergy awareness. I know we've got nut allergies. I know we've got gluten allergies. I know we've got dairy allergies. And some of them are quite severe. So we have to incorporate all that in the work that we're doing. And the chefs at Burley Court, excuse me, Burley Court at Loughborough University have been really open to actually having all these different requirements. You know, shellfish allergies. We've got one banana allergy. Actually allergic, mouth swells up when they touch the skin of a banana. All right. And we've got some minimalistic labelling, and we're trying to use the same stuff that goes on here. And we have what we call the gates of gel. All right. So if you walk into the dining room, this is what I call my wooden spoon moment. So I'll be sitting there with my wooden spoon. If you come into the dining room and I think you haven't gelled your hands, I'll send you back to do it. And it's all about the handles and touching everything. And we've got a lot of athletes that don't have a lot of experience at working or serving from a buffet. My pet hate, and I'm sure you've seen it, people that go along the buffet, lift the lid up, stick their head in it, and their makeup, eyelashes, hair and everything falls into the soup, take a big sniff, and they go, oh, I'm not having that, and then put the lid back on it. We will not see any of that behaviour. People will get buffet hygiene training. You'll not be allowed into the dining room if you are sweating and you've just come straight in from training. You have to go and have a shower. Coaches, athletes, I don't care how famous you are, if you come in dripping sweat, I don't want your sweat dripping all over my meals.
This is just GB athletes.
This is just team. This is the holding camp. This is Team GB. Yeah, I can't do it for everybody else, but we warn everybody just to watch out for things like don't go over there if somebody's dripping into the fruit salad, for example. And they're all going to have a handout on their responsibilities. But these are the simple ways that people get sick. All right, and it only takes an incubation period of about 8 hours for you to come down with a staphylococcus infection that has wiped out 4, 8, 10, 12 years of training. And we can't afford any of them. All right? Okay. I've covered most of that. There's just some odd things that I've done in previous big events that I've actually worked in that I just thought I would actually put up there. I've had people with kidney infections where we've actually had to go and get cranberry juice and things to help them out. Had to run around finding people supplements. Had to do some special advice, had to do breakfast trays for people who've flown in and they're so jet lagged that they're still not working, their body clocks haven't still come round. And the only time that we change the menu is on the opening day for the opening ceremony, and we will have a cake. This is the one we've got for Beijing. Alright, I've already been talking to the catering. Everything on there is edible. Now you might think that looks like a great cake, but that had to do 250 people, so you've got a 1-inch square. Alright, so it wouldn't interfere with anybody's weight control or weight management kind of programs. Okay, and I think I've covered all of that. And then we'll hand them over to London. Alright, so they will get a meal pack, they'll get a copy of the menus, they'll get a copy of the layout, and we'll say, right, they're off to London now, off you go, you're all set, ready to go.
Don't you go with them?
No.
Oh.
No, because I've got to stay behind and look after the ones that are still there.
Oh, I see.
The holding camp stays open until 4 days before the end of the... I will see most athletes, but not one event. That's normally what happens. Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing this for long enough now, that's just how it is. Absolutely. We see more of them on the TV in the dining room, watching them, than we actually do anywhere else, to be fair.
How many athletes do we have?
We have about 550. Yeah. It's the biggest team we've ever had. And then there'll be more with coaches, and it's the biggest team ever because we have a lot of opportunities because it's our home games. And most of those will be first-time Olympians. Yeah.
Ask about the Ramadan thing.
Yes.
And how you're dealing with that.
Each athlete in terms of Ramadan will be asked to deal it from their personal perspective.
Yeah.
Many athletes can actually delay it, or they can actually ask permission. There's many ways that they can actually transfer it to another time. But for the athletes that are strict, we will have access to food for them pretty much during dark times, and we'll be advising them on when and how they should eat. The hardest one for people who want to be very strict with Ramadan, if it's going to be hot, is actually maintaining their hydration status. Yeah, and hopefully most of them are in events that are either early in the morning or late in the evening, and they'll cope. If they're in the middle of the day, it's going to be a struggle for them. Yeah.
One of the saddest things that you said along the way was your passing reference to all of those hundreds of athletes whose careers are going to be over and who can then go and pig out.
Well, I
it suggested to me that perhaps the contribution of athletics to the general health of the nation may be somewhat equivocal, and it could help to explain why we're looking more and more like a nation of retired sumo wrestlers.
Yeah, I hate to tell you though, but an athlete's version of picking out for most of them, because they actually don't have the taste buds that you and I have, they will sit down and they will eat X amount of really rich food and then they'll stop because they're just not used to eating it. Yeah, their picking out and our picking out aren't quite the same.
No.
Yeah.
Well, the ex-athletes that I know that have difficulty getting through doors suggest that there's something else
Or
involved.
maybe they still think they're athletes and are eating like it. Maybe that's what it is. Yeah.
So, the sailing
Yeah.
athletes, are they at the holding camp then until they're ready to go to Weymouth to...
No, they'll actually, the Team GB will actually be down there already because that's their base. One of the big advantages for Team GB this time is that Weymouth is their home for sailing. And that's where the venue is. And that's why they moved there 4 years ago.
Right.
All right, because they knew that's where it was going to be. And so they've been training down there and they have their facilities all organised. Yeah, absolutely. And then there is a smaller hub. The unique thing about London Olympics is that there are 3 major venues for food and for the Olympics. It's not in one place. All right, China did some of that, but we've got the rowing venue, and then we've got the sailing venue, and then we've got London, pretty much, yeah, and everything all around London. Yeah, so it's kind of unique. Yeah, there's 3 defined venues of which people have known about. Yeah. But it should be quite a spectacle. But what I just wanted to get across to you was I want you to think about what goes into making those human machines. Yeah, and the amount of training and the fine-tuning and the precision that you will see people at when they actually go out. And in some ways, 1 kilo can make a second difference in some of those events. And when you're winning and losing medals by 0.01 of a second, it becomes incredibly crucial for us to get it absolutely right.
Is it actually a level playing field? Because it seems to me that our athletes are getting huge attention and everything is good for them, but what about all the others?
I think across the world, I think it's the same.
Is it?
You know, I know the American athletes are under a lot of pressure. I know the Australian athletes are under a lot of pressure. Each country has ramped up its medal count, and there's more medals they think they're going to win than there are actually on the table. All right, so somewhere along the line, the best of the best will win out at the end of the day. Yeah.
There's been something in the media today, I think it's Lance Armstrong in the Tour de France, and they've said that he was having blood transfusions and things. How realistic is that?
I can't comment on what Lance has done, and it isn't. It's an issue within cycling at that time, and until he's actually proven and they can actually say that that's actually done on law record, I think we need to be very careful about what people do and don't say and that sort of thing. I think what we all want is for it to be an honest playing field when people line up at the start line. That's the best that we can hope for.
That people had transfusions?
Well, I think obviously there is a history of some of that in cycling, in some of those Tour de France events. How much of it's going on now, because we know a lot of people have died from those, and there have been a number of quite serious sudden deaths from EPO, which is the erythropoietin, which makes you more red blood cells, in the past, that hopefully a lot of people aren't doing that anymore, because it is just really dangerous, and it could kill you. Yeah.
Any other questions? I have one. How much does the athlete's diet change in, say, the month before the
it's a good
event?
one. That is a really good question. Hugely, because often they're tapering, and by tapering they're doing less training. So if they want to maintain their condition or their physical peak and their body weight, they may have to actually adjust their food down, because they're not doing quite as much training.
Adjust it down in calories.
Just it down in oil and calories and carbs in particular, and maybe be much harder on saturated fat and look at more omega-3 to kind of protect their immune system. Yeah, we do. There's quite a bit of individual tapering that goes on. For the marathon guys, they don't want to put on any weight, but as they taper down for the 10 days or 5 days, whatever they're doing, because it's all individual, they will need to make sure they get enough glycogen and enough protein, but not want to get heavy because they're not doing the same amount of training. A lot of them struggle when they're used to doing so much training not to do that level of training. And they'll tell you that they're just itching to get out there, you know, which is kind of a nice place to be, but it does make it a bit harder for them. Versus, you know, if you go back 18 months to 2 years ago, everybody was in a very hard endurance phase. So it was getting the fitness, doing the mileage, doing the skills under pressure, doing the skills dehydrated, doing the skills with low glycogen stores, you know, trying to find all those adaptations. By now they've done it all. Alright, so now, and probably the last 2 weeks and the next 2 weeks, it's just the final tweaking. And for the weight class athletes, they're on it every day. They're checking every day, so they're not going to be any chance of being over. Because if you rock up on those scales and you can't get it down, you're out the door. Yeah.
Can I just ask what actually last presumably sleep has a major
Huge.
So
Yes.
how, especially just days before when usually they're absolutely
We might be, but some of them aren't. Some of them are just so seasoned, they're just so calm, it's amazing. But sleep is a really important, it's an important part of recovery, and it's an important part of your mental preparation. So we have things that we can do in nutrition for sleep. For example, having a glass of cherry juice before you go to bed, it helps produce melatonin, which helps you to sleep. Having a glass of milk with the tryptophan, good old chocolate milk does wonders, alright? So that works well. Not drinking huge amounts of water, so you wake up in the middle of the night and have to go to the bathroom, disrupting your sleep. Sometimes we give athletes a sports drink so that they can actually stay hydrated and not wake up, because the extra sodium in the drink helps to keep the blood volume, the sodium in the blood volume, so you're not spitting out all the water. There's sneaky things that we can get up to. And they're all out there in the general media, so I can tell you those ones. I haven't told you anything really secret squirrely. Yeah.
I'll just ask another question. What sort of knock-on effect could this have for the general public?
I have just finished writing an IOC legacy document on nutrition and exercise and physical activity. We're just trying to get some things together now to get some nice graphics and things put on, and that's been done as a joint project with the European Hydration Institute, the Sports Dietitians UK and the English Institute of Sport. That's part of our legacy. So we've taken some of the science, toned it down a little bit because they're not doing the same amount of training, and it's going to be made available. So yeah, there is this huge legacy. And in some of the research that we're doing, there'll be things that will come back to clinical medicine, and there's things that we take from clinical medicine that we can use in the athletic population. So there's quite a lot of change and quite a lot of swapping of information that goes on. So particularly in the area of nutrition, we're quite comfortable because we're kind of hoping that what the whole Olympics does is actually make people think about what they're eating and how it fine-tunes their body and what they can actually do if they eat right. Yeah.
Can I just ask, you said that a lot of them came to the holding camp with injuries, so do you have to prescribe specific nutrition if they've got an injury?
That's part of the work I do in the intensive rehab unit, which is based at Bisham Abbey. But the other part of it is that, yes, if they suddenly get an injury, which happens quite, you'd be amazed how often an athlete does a training session and they just roll an ankle or, you know, do something just totally obscure and hurt their back or something. Usually we work very closely with the doctors and the physios. Alright, so those two will have the first biggest call along with the athlete and the coach, and then we may come in and help them to manipulate their energy intake and their carb intake if they can't exercise the same, or we may help them with a few supplements that might help reduce inflammation or actually help provide a bit of protection for them. Yeah. So it keeps us pretty busy.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. You're very welcome.